Prisoner transfer complete. Enjoy your stay on Tartarus, human. Nobody leaves this rock alive. The voice crackled through the ancient speaker system as the transport ship disengaged its docking clamps and prepared to depart. I watched from my observation post as the newest batch of criminals was herded onto the surface of our miserable little planetoid. 15 new arrivals, 14 males of various species, and 1 female human. That human would change everything. Not that I knew it then, of course. At the time, she was just another unfortunate soul dumped on our forsaken rock, the galaxy's preferred solution for its most troublesome individuals. My name is Krasnul, Senior Warden of Detention Zone 7, Tartarus Penal Colony. Well, that was my title 8 cycles ago. Now I'm just the official historian for what everyone calls the Lawson Empire. Funny how things change. The human female Miranda Lawson stood out immediately. Not because humans were rare on Tartarus. The Galactic Confederation loved sending humans here. Their species had a remarkable talent for causing problems. No, she stood out because she wasn't cowering, wasn't scanning for threats, wasn't doing any of the things new arrivals typically did during their first moments on the surface. She was smiling, actually smiling, as if being sentenced to life imprisonment on the most notorious penal colony in 3 sectors was somehow amusing. Fresh meat for processing, Warden, grunted Officer Drax, my Horvian deputy. 7 feet of scaled muscle with a disposition that made most inmates soil themselves. Want me to give the usual welcome speech? I nodded absently, still watching the human. Go ahead, make sure they understand the rules. Drax lumbered forward, his heavy tail dragging through the red dust. Tartarus wasn't completely inhospitable. It had breathable air, tolerable gravity, and temperatures that wouldn't instantly kill most carbon-based lifeforms. But it was hardly paradise. Barren red plains stretched for miles, broken only by craggy mountains and the scattered prefab structures that comprised our civilization. Listen up, waste products, Drax bellowed. Welcome to Tartarus. There are 3 rules here. 1. Don't try to escape. The planet will kill you before you reach the stratosphere. 2. Work your assigned shifts in the mines or processing plants. 3. Don't cause trouble for the wardens. The new arrivals shuffled nervously, eyes downcast except for the human. She was examining the horizon, the guard towers, the perimeter fence, like she was memorizing details for later. Any questions? Drax finished, baring his yellowed fangs in what passed for a smile among Horvians. Yes, actually, the human spoke up, her voice surprisingly melodic for someone who'd just been dumped in hell. What's the power source for the perimeter fence? Those look like outdated Rixian generators. They tend to fluctuate during ion storms. Silence fell over the arrival zone. Inmates didn't ask questions like that, not if they wanted to keep all their appendages attached. Drax stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he laughed, a harsh barking sound. We have got ourselves a comedian. Tell you what, human, you will get a personal tour of those generators when we strap you to one during the next storm. The other prisoners shuffled away from the human, creating distance between themselves and this obvious troublemaker. Self-preservation was the first lesson most inmates learned. But Miranda Lawson just nodded, as if Drax had confirmed something important rather than threatened her with painful death. Processing begins in 10 minutes. I announced, stepping forward. You will be assigned quarters and work details. Remember, cooperation extends your life expectancy. Resistance shortens it dramatically. As the group was herded toward the processing center, I caught the human looking directly at me. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt an involuntary shiver run down my spine ridges. There was something in that gaze, calculation, intelligence, and not a trace of fear. That one's going to be trouble, Drax muttered, echoing my thoughts. But are in Block D, I replied, with the Zaxtorians. Block D housed our most physically intimidating inmates. If the human had any misplaced confidence, a night surrounded by 8-foot carnivorous prisoners would adjust her attitude. Isn't that a death sentence? Drax asked, sounding almost impressed by my cruelty. It's an education, I corrected. Better she learns now how things work here. In retrospect, I couldn't have made a worse decision, or perhaps a better one, depending on your perspective. What I intended as a lesson for Miranda Lawson became the first step in her extraordinary rise to power. 3 days passed before the incident in Block D. 3 days during which Miranda Lawson worked her mining shift without complaint, ate the nutritional slop we called food without comment, and generally behaved like a model prisoner. So model, in fact, that I should have been suspicious. The alarm blared during the facility's night cycle, jolting me from my sleep. Red emergency lights bathed my quarters as I hurriedly dressed and rushed to the security center. "Report," I barked as I entered. Officer Telekak, our Vantari communications specialist, turned from the monitors. "Disturbance in Block D, sir. Medical emergency. Inmates. The Zaxtorian Alpha. Gorntech. He's well, you should see for yourself." The security feed showed a scene of chaos. A dozen Zactorians were huddled in a corner of their communal cell, making distress sounds. In the center of the floor lay Gorntech, all 8 feet and 400 pounds of him, writhing in apparent agony. "Where's the human?" I asked immediately. Telek pointed to another corner of the screen. There was Miranda Lawson, sitting calmly on her bunk, observing the situation with detached interest. "What happened?" "Unknown, sir. The night feed shows Gorntech approaching the human's bunk approximately 20 minutes ago." There was an exchange of words, then Gorntech returned to his sleeping area. 5 minutes later he began exhibiting symptoms. I frowned. "Poison? Medical team is on their way to assess." I stared at the screen, watching Miranda Lawson's face. She wasn't celebrating, wasn't showing fear or concern, just waiting. "Lock down the block and bring her to interrogation," I ordered. "I didn't poison anyone," Miranda Lawson said calmly, seated across from me in the stark interrogation room. No restraints we'd tried, but she'd pointed out that Confederation Prisoner Rights Accord, Section 7 prohibited restraining inmates during questioning unless they showed violent behavior. The fact that she knew the exact section number didn't escape my notice. "Gorntech is experiencing liver failure," I said flatly. "A coincidence. After he threatened you." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that what he was doing?" My translator interpreted it as a rather crude mating proposition. "Zactorians are territorial carnivores," I explained, wondering why I was bothering. "He wasn't proposing mating. He was establishing dominance by informing you that you were now his property." "How unoriginal," she sighed. "And boring." I leaned forward. 3 days on Tartarus. And you have managed to incapacitate the most feared inmate in Block D." "How?" Miranda smiled, that same unsettling smile from her arrival. "Warden Kresnile, I studied xenobiology at the Terran Academy. Did you know that Zaxtorians have a fascinating digestive system? Their secondary stomach produces an enzyme called xorilium that breaks down proteins, but that same enzyme becomes toxic when it encounters certain metallic compounds like the chromium alloy used in standard-issue Confederation prison cutlery." My inner eyelids flickered in surprise. "You… what?" I simply mentioned to Gorntech that I noticed him chewing on his spork during dinner. "A common nervous habit," I told him. "Nothing to worry about, except of course for the fact that xorilium and chromium create a compound that causes liver failure within hours." Her smile widened. "Just an educational conversation between cellmates. You deliberately misled him into poisoning himself." I shared a scientific fact. "What he chose to do with that information isn't my responsibility." She leaned forward. "He will live, by the way. The damage is reversible with proper treatment. I'd recommend a xorilium neutralizer and liver support for about 2 weeks." I stared at her. This human hadn't been on Tartarus a full week, and she'd neutralized the most dangerous inmate without laying a finger on him, while ensuring the solution to his condition was something only she could provide. "What do you want?" I asked finally. "Reassignment to Block A," she replied promptly. "The scientific research section. My talents are wasted in the mines." Block A housed our most intelligent and specialized inmates, those whose skills made them valuable for research projects that benefited the Confederation. It was also the most comfortable accommodation on Tartarus, with private quarters and access to technical resources. "Impossible," I said. "Block A requires specific skills and security clearance." "Check my file, Warden. Before my disagreement with Confederation authorities, I was chief researcher at the Helios Biological Research Station, specialized in adaptive biotechnology." I frowned. Her file had listed her only as dangerous political dissident, but something in her confident tone made me suspect she was telling the truth. "I will consider it," I said, rising from my chair. "In the meantime, you will be placed in solitary while we treat Gorntak and investigate this incident." "Fair enough." She stood smoothly. "Oh, and Warden, when you check my file, look up why I was really sent here. It might save us both some time." She was right, of course. Her complete file, which required my highest security clearance to access, revealed that Miranda Lawson had indeed been the brilliant mind behind several breakthrough medical technologies. Her political dissidence was more complex than I'd been led to believe. Miranda had discovered that her research supposedly for treating rare genetic diseases was being weaponized by certain Confederation military factions. When she attempted to go public with her findings, she was swiftly silenced, framed for sabotage, and sentenced to Tartarus. What was most disturbing was the recommendation attached to her file: subject possesses dangerous intelligence and persuasive abilities, minimize contact with other inmates, prevent access to laboratory facilities at all costs. Naturally, I did the opposite. Not out of kindness or belief in her innocence. I'd been a warden too long for such sentimentality. No, I recognized an opportunity. Tartarus had limited medical facilities, outdated equipment, and a constant stream of injured inmates. If Miranda Lawson could improve our situation while believing she was manipulating the system to her advantage, why not let her try? So began our arrangement. Miranda was assigned to Block A, given lab access with certain restrictions, and put in charge of the medical facility. In return, she provided treatments that reduced inmate fatalities by 40% in the first month alone. "You are playing a dangerous game," Krasnal warned Security Chief Vex, one of the few staff members I somewhat trusted. "That human is planning something." "Of course she is," I agreed, watching through the observation window as Miranda efficiently treated a Drexian miner's respiratory infection. "Everyone on this rock is planning something. The question is whether her plans benefit us in the meantime. And when they don't?" I flexed my claws. "Then we remind her that Tartarus has many ways to deal with troublemakers." Vex clicked his mandibles skeptically, but said nothing more. Over the next 2 months, Miranda established herself as invaluable to the medical operations of the facility. Inmates who would have died from injuries or disease survived. Productivity in the mines increased as fewer workers fell ill. Even the guards benefited from her medical knowledge. What I didn't fully appreciate was how she was building a network of grateful patients, indebted inmates, and impressed staff members. By the time I recognized the pattern, Miranda Lawson had become the most connected person on Tartarus. "The Noxavarian in cell 342 was asking for you specifically," I mentioned during one of our weekly progress meetings. "He refused treatment from anyone else." "Ral." "Yes, I treated his mate last month. Saved her arm after that mining accident." Miranda didn't look up from her data tablet. "Noxavarians are intensely loyal when it comes to family debts. And the Taran guards who bring you extra rations." Now she glanced up, a slight smile playing at her lips. "I developed an ointment that relieves their scale rot. Apparently the standard issue medication was ineffective." "You are building quite the network of allies," I observed neutrally. "I prefer to think of it as establishing a functional society based on mutual benefit rather than fear." She set down her tablet. "Isn't that what rehabilitation is supposed to be about, Warden?" "Tartarus isn't about rehabilitation, Ms. Lawson. It's about containment." "How depressingly unambitious," she sighed. "Tell me, have you noticed the 30% decrease in violent incidents since I established the medical training program for inmates?" She was referring to her latest initiative, training selected prisoners from each block in basic medical care. I had approved it reluctantly, seeing the potential for abuse but also recognizing the practical benefits. "I have noticed," I admitted. "And the improved nutrition from the hydroponic garden project," another of her programs. She had convinced me to convert an unused storage area into a hydroponic facility to grow nutritional supplements for the food supply. The results had been impressive: better health, fewer fights over resources. "Your point?" "My point, Warden, is that Tartarus doesn't have to be the hellhole the Confederation designed it to be. With proper organization, even a prison planet can function efficiently." I studied her for a long moment. "And I suppose you see yourself as the organizer?" Her smile was answer enough. The turning point came 6 months into Miranda's stay when the supply ship was late, 2 weeks late, to be precise. On a prison planet with limited resources, 2 weeks could mean the difference between order and chaos. Rations have been cut by 30%, reported Officer Drax. Water recycling is at maximum capacity but still struggling. The inmates are getting restless. Any word from Central Command? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nothing new. Same message as before: supply chain disruptions due to the Kral sector conflict. They will send a ship when they can. I rubbed my face ridges tiredly. The Confederation's priorities were clear. A distant prison planet was low on their list during wartime. We need to implement emergency protocols. I decided. Reduced work shifts to conserve energy. Minimum life support in non-essential areas. The inmates won't like it, Drax warned. They will like starvation less. After Drax left, I summoned Miranda to my office. She arrived promptly, looking remarkably composed despite the deteriorating situation. You wanted to see me, Warden? The supply situation is worse than we have let on, I said bluntly. At current consumption rates we have perhaps 10 days of food remaining. She nodded, unsurprised. I have been tracking the inventory logs. It's closer to 8 days, actually. Of course she had access to the inventory systems, probably through one of her grateful patients in administration. I'm implementing emergency protocols, I continued, but I want your assessment of how the inmate population will respond. They will riot, she said simply. Not immediately, but once hunger truly sets in, probably around day 6 of severe rationing. Your recommendation? She raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised I was asking for her input. But I had learned that Miranda Lawson's insights, while sometimes uncomfortable, were invariably useful. Let me organize a resource management committee, she suggested. Representatives from each block, working together to distribute what we have fairly. Transparency about the situation will buy cooperation at least for a while. Giving inmates control over resources? I scoffed. That's practically handing them the keys to the facility. Not control, she corrected. Input. Supervised by your staff, of course. But if the inmates feel they have a voice in how the crisis is managed, they are less likely to resort to violence. I considered her proposal. It was unorthodox, possibly dangerous, but Miranda had proven herself shrewd, and frankly I was running out of options. 3 representatives per block, I decided. Selected by you and approved by me. They will work with Officer Telek on distribution plans. Thank you, Warden. She started to rise. Miranda, I said, using her first name for perhaps the first time. This committee, it's temporary. Once supplies resume, we return to normal operations. Her smile contained a hint of something I couldn't quite identify.
Of course, Warden.
Purely a crisis measure. I should have known better. The Resource Management Committee, as it came to be called, was surprisingly effective. Miranda selected inmates with influence in their respective blocks, not always the physically dominant ones, but those with leadership qualities who could maintain order. Food was distributed equitably. Water usage was regulated. The hydroponics garden was expanded to supplement rations. Even the mining operations continued, albeit at a reduced pace. What I hadn't anticipated was how the committee would change the power dynamics of Tartarus. Suddenly these inmate representatives had status beyond their blocks. They were communicating across previously rigid boundaries, solving problems collectively, gaining respect from both peers and guards. And at the center of it all was Miranda Lawson, officially just another committee member, but clearly the driving force behind their organization. The Eastern Water Recycler has failed completely, announced Beck, a burly Trellian representing the mining sector. Technicians say parts are unavailable. The committee had gathered in what was once a storage room, now converted to a meeting space. I observed from the back, allowing Officer Telek to represent the administration officially. Block C has been experimenting with alternative filtration, offered Nala, a sharp-minded Voxian from the research sector. We have had some success using modified mineral deposits from the northern caves. My team can install the filters if Block C provides the designs, added a mechanoid inmate whose name I could never remember. Miranda said little during these exchanges, but I noticed how often others glanced her way before speaking, seeking her subtle nod of approval. By the time the supply ship finally arrived, nearly a month late, the prison was operating more efficiently than it had in years. The feared riots never materialized. In fact, reported incidents of violence had decreased despite the stress of resource scarcity. The committee has served its purpose, I told Miranda afterward. It's time to dissolve it and return to standard operations. We were standing in the landing bay, watching as crates of supplies were unloaded under heavy guard. Is that wise, Warden? She asked mildly. The committee has proven remarkably effective at problem solving. Why dismantle a functioning system? Because this is a prison, not a democracy, I replied firmly. The Confederation would not approve of inmates having this level of self-governance. Miranda's gaze drifted to the supply ship, then back to me. Tell me, Warden, how often do Confederation officials actually visit Tartarus? You know they don't, I admitted. Inspection is done remotely, through reports and data transmission. Reports that you submit, she pointed out. Data that your systems provide. I narrowed my eyes. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that what happens on Tartarus largely stays on Tartarus, as long as the required resources are produced and transmitted, as long as no escapes are reported, as long as your data shows acceptable stability. Does the Confederation truly care how you achieve those results? She was right, of course. The unspoken truth of facilities like Tartarus was that the Confederation cared about outcomes, not methods. As long as the prison remained secure and productive, Central Command was content to leave day-to-day operations to the wardens. The committee stays, I decided, surprising even myself. In an advisory capacity only. Miranda's smile was genuine this time. A wise decision, Warden, for everyone. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything truly changed. Not when Miranda neutralized Gorntech, not when she took over the medical facility, not even when she established her network of allies. No, it was when the authority on Tartarus legitimized her shadow governance structure. The rise of the Lawson Empire had officially begun. Over the next year, Miranda's influence grew steadily but subtly. The Resource Management Committee expanded its purview beyond basic necessities to include work assignments, conflict resolution, and even educational initiatives. All with my approval, all presented as ways to make Tartarus more efficient and secure. And they worked. Productivity increased, violence decreased. The medical facilities improved. Even the guards benefited from better working conditions and increased safety. I told myself I was still in control, that Miranda was simply making my job easier while improving conditions for everyone. When Security Chief Vex raised concerns, I dismissed them as paranoia. She's created a parallel power structure, he insisted during one of our private meetings. The inmates look to her and the committee before they look to us. They still obey our orders, I countered. The fences are still electrified, the guard towers still manned. As long as Tartarus remains secure and productive, Central Command is satisfied. And when she decides security is no longer in her interest. I had no good answer for that. The truth was, Miranda Lawson had made herself indispensable not just to the inmates, but to the administration as well. Her organizational skills, her medical knowledge, her ability to solve problems before they became crises, these had become essential to the functioning of Tartarus. And somewhere along the way, I had become comfortable with this arrangement, perhaps even complicit in it. The day everything changed for good began like any other. I was reviewing production reports in my office when the alarm sounded, not the standard security alarm, but the rarely heard signal for an incoming emergency transmission from Central Command. I rushed to the communications center where Officer Telek was already responding to the call. Tartarus Penal Colony, receiving emergency transmission. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern face of Commander Jorax, Confederation Security Division. His expression was grave. Warden Krezinol, be advised that a Confederation scout ship has detected an unregistered vessel on approach to Tartarus. The vessel does not match known configurations and has not responded to hails. Estimated arrival in your sector within 6 hours. My blood ran cold. In the 20 years I'd served on Tartarus, we had never faced an external threat. The planet's remote location and lack of valuable resources made it an unlikely target for raiders or hostile forces. What are your orders, Commander? I asked. Implement full lockdown protocols. Arm all security personnel. Prepare for possible hostile action. His image flickered. Be advised that reinforcements are unlikely at this time. The Kral conflict has escalated. All available ships are engaged. In other words, we were on our own. Understood, Commander. We will secure the facility. Confederation out. The transmission ended. I turned to find Officer Drax and Security Chief Vex already awaiting instructions. Full lockdown. I ordered all inmates confined to quarters. Double the guard on critical systems. And, I hesitated, then made a decision I would later question. Summon Miranda Lawson to the security center. Vex's mandibles clicked in obvious disapproval, but he said nothing. When Miranda arrived escorted by 2 armed guards, she took in the heightened activity with a raised eyebrow. I take it we have a situation, Warden? I briefed her on the approaching vessel, watching her reaction carefully. If this was somehow connected to an escape attempt by outside Confederates, perhaps she hid it well. Her expression showed only thoughtful concern. What defenses does Tartarus have against an external threat? She asked when I finished. Limited, I admitted. The perimeter fence is designed to keep people in, not out. The guard towers have basic weapons systems. There's an automated defense grid around the landing bay, but it's designed for small craft, not capital ships. And the inmates? I frowned. What about them? If this is an attack, what happens to the inmates? We are talking about over 2,000 individuals in a facility suddenly under siege. It was a fair question and one I hadn't fully considered in my focus on defensive measures. Standard protocol is to maintain lockdown, I said, protect critical systems and administrative personnel, leaving the inmates to their fate if the attackers breach the facility. She concluded. The Confederation's priority is preventing escapes, I said stiffly, not prisoner comfort during an emergency. Miranda's eyes hardened. Those prisoners include engineers who maintain your life support systems, medical personnel who keep your staff healthy, and workers who produce the resources the Confederation values. They are also living beings who depend on you for protection. Before I could respond, a technician interrupted. Warden, the vessel has accelerated. New arrival estimate is 2 hours. I turned back to Miranda. Return to your quarters, Miss Lawson. This is a security matter. You need every resource available, Warden, she argued, including the committee's ability to maintain order among the inmates during a crisis. This isn't open for discussion. Actually, said a new voice, I believe it is. I turned to find Drax, my most loyal officer, standing with his weapon lowered. Behind him were several other guards, their postures similarly non-threatening. Drax, what is this? A necessary adjustment, Warden Miranda said quietly. Your defensive strategy is flawed. We need a unified response to this threat, inmates and staff working together. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of how many eyes were avoiding mine. How many of my own security personnel had Miranda won over during the past year? How many owed her for medical treatment, for improved conditions, for solving problems that made their jobs easier? This is mutiny, I growled. This is survival, she corrected, and I'm not suggesting removing you from command, merely expanding your advisory council during this emergency. I had a choice to make. I could resist, call for the guards still loyal to me, attempt to reassert control through force. Or I could acknowledge the reality that had been building for months. Miranda Lawson was already running much of Tartarus. With my unwitting cooperation. What do you propose? I asked finally. Joint command for the duration of the emergency. You, me, Chief Vex, and block representatives Nala and Beck, we pool our knowledge, our resources, and our people to defend Tartarus. And if I refuse? Miranda's expression was almost sympathetic. Then you place everyone at risk for the sake of protocol. Is that really the legacy you want, Warden? In that moment, I saw clearly what I had allowed to happen. This brilliant, manipulative human had been playing a long game from the moment she arrived. Every concession I made, every reform I approved, every time I sought her counsel, all of it had led to this moment, when she could step forward and claim power not through violence but through necessity. And the worst part was, she was right about the defense strategy. We needed everyone working together if we were to have any chance against an unknown threat. Joint command, I agreed reluctantly. For the duration of the emergency only. Miranda nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. Thank you, Warden. Now let's prepare our people. What followed was the most efficient emergency mobilization I had ever witnessed. While I coordinated with the guard towers and weapons systems, Miranda and her committee representatives organized the inmate population. Block by block they were briefed, assigned emergency duties, and prepared for possible evacuation scenarios. Engineers reinforced critical systems. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Even the miners were organized into emergency response units, armed with tools that could serve as weapons if necessary. Through it all, Miranda moved with purpose and authority, speaking to inmates and staff alike with calm confidence. And they listened to her not with the reluctant compliance they showed Confederation authorities, but with genuine respect. As the mysterious vessel drew closer, I found myself in the observation tower with Miranda, watching the sky for the first sign of our visitor. "You have been planning for something like this," I said, not a question but a statement. She glanced at me, a slight smile playing at her lips. "I have been planning for contingencies, Warden. It's what I do. And if the vessel turns out to be friendly? What then?" "Then we return to our previous arrangement," she said smoothly. "No harm done." But we both knew there was no going back. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Even if we survived this crisis with the command structure technically intact, everyone on Tartarus now knew who really held authority. "There," called the lookout, approaching from Vector. We raised our viewscopes to the sky, where a dark shape was rapidly growing larger. As it drew closer, I could make out a sleek, unfamiliar design, neither Confederation nor any known hostile power. "Defensive systems online," reported Chief Vex from his station. "All weapons locked and tracking. Hold fire until we determine their intentions," I ordered. The vessel slowed as it entered Tartarus's atmosphere, its hull glowing briefly from the friction. It made no aggressive movements, no attempt to evade our tracking systems. Instead, it descended steadily toward the landing zone, as if it had been invited. "They are transmitting a signal," announced the communications officer. "Audio only." "Put it through," I commanded. The speaker crackled, and a calm, measured voice filled the observation tower. "Tartarus Penal Colony. This is Captain Ilara Voss of the independent vessel Horizon. We come with a proposition for the one called Miranda Lawson." All eyes turned to Miranda, who showed no surprise at this development. Only a slight widening of her smile indicated any reaction at all. "It seems," she said quietly, "that the next phase has begun." And that's when I truly knew that everything about Miranda Lawson's time on Tartarus had been carefully orchestrated from the beginning. This was no coincidence, no lucky break. This was the culmination of a plan set in motion long before she ever set foot on our prison planet. The rise of the Lawson Empire wasn't just beginning. It had been underway all along. The name Ilara Voss hung in the air of the observation tower like a suspended blade. I watched Miranda's face closely, searching for confirmation of what I already suspected, that this mysterious arrival was no coincidence. "You know this person," I said flatly. Miranda turned to me, her expression giving away nothing. "Captain Voss has a certain reputation in independent circles. A problem solver, you might say." "A mercenary," corrected Chief Vex, mandibles clicking in agitation. "A businesswoman with flexible ethics," Miranda countered smoothly. "And apparently she has business on Tartarus." The communications panel chimed again. Captain Voss's voice returned, more insistent this time. "Tartarus Control, we are maintaining position but request landing clearance. Our intentions are non-hostile. Repeat, we come with a proposition, not threats." I gestured to the communications officer to mute our response. "What exactly is happening here, Miranda?" His smile was infuriatingly calm. "An opportunity, Warden, for all of us." "You have been in contact with outsiders," accused Vex, stepping forward. "A direct violation." "I have been in contact with no one," Miranda interrupted, "but I did leave certain contingency plans in place before my arrival here. It appears they have finally borne fruit. I should have placed her in isolation immediately. Should have locked down the facility, refused the vessel landing clearance, and reported everything to Central Command. That would have been protocol. Instead, I found myself asking, what kind of opportunity? Because that was the effect. Miranda Lawson, had she made you curious about possibilities you'd never considered before? "Permission to land the vessel and meet with Captain Voss," she requested. "Under whatever security measures you deem appropriate." "And if I refuse?" Her expression grew serious. "Then we face an unknown ship with unknown capabilities and unknown intentions. Or we can discover exactly what they want and make an informed decision." Which seems more prudent to you, Warden? Put like that, there was really only one reasonable choice. Landing Bay 3, I decided. Minimal crew only. Full security protocols. And you, I pointed at Miranda, will be under guard at all times. She nodded agreeably. Of course. As preparations were made for the landing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was following a script Miranda had written long ago. Landing Bay 3 was our smallest and most secure docking area, typically used for supply ships carrying sensitive materials. We had it surrounded with our heaviest security, 20 guards, automated defense systems, and 3 separate containment protocols ready to activate at the first sign of trouble, all of which felt strangely inadequate as the sleek vessel called Horizon settled onto the landing pad with barely a sound. Its design was unlike anything I'd seen before: smooth lines, dark metal with subtle blue highlights, and propulsion systems that seemed unusually advanced. "Vessel secured," announced Officer Drax. "Airlock pressurizing." Miranda stood beside me, flanked by 2 armed guards. She appeared perfectly relaxed, as if welcoming distinguished guests rather than potential threats. "Remember our agreement," I warned her quietly. "One wrong move and this meeting ends." "Noted, Warden." Her eyes remained fixed on the ship's main hatch, which was now sliding open with a soft hiss. The first figure to emerge was tall and slender, with pale blue skin and striking white hair cut in a severe style. She wore what appeared to be a captain's uniform, though not of any military I recognized: charcoal gray with silver accents and no insignia. "Captain Ella Ravas, I presume," I called out. She inclined her head slightly. "Warden Krasnol, your reputation precedes you." I wasn't aware I had a reputation beyond Tartarus, which was concerning in itself. 2 more crew members followed her out, a burly reptilian species I identified as Crexian, and a small, almost childlike humanoid with large eyes and 6-fingered hands that marked them as Tellurian. Both wore similar uniforms to their captain but carried no visible weapons. "You said you have a proposition," I prompted, not interested in prolonged formalities. Captain Voss smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp to be reassuring. "Indeed, but I believe it would be best discussed privately." Her gaze shifted to Miranda. "With all relevant parties present." "Anything you have to say can be said here," I insisted. "Very well." Voss clasped her hands behind her back. "My employers wish to establish a business relationship with Tartarus Penal Colony. The Confederation handles all official business with Tartarus," I replied automatically. "Yes. And how frequently do they visit? How attentive have they been to your needs during the Kral conflict?" Vessa's tone was conversational, but her words struck like precision weapons. "Our intelligence suggests the Confederation has been distracted lately. Supply shortages, communication delays, reduced oversight." She wasn't wrong, which made her assessment all the more unsettling. "What kind of business relationship?" asked Miranda, speaking for the first time since the ship landed. Voss's expression brightened. "Direct and to the point. I appreciate that, Miss Lawson." She gestured to her Tellurian crew member, who produced a small holographic projector. "May I?" I nodded reluctantly. The device activated, projecting a detailed 3-dimensional map of the sector. Tartarus was highlighted, along with several nearby star systems I didn't immediately recognize. "The Confederation has been using Tartarus as a simple detention facility, a waste of resources and potential." Voss explained, "This region is rich in untapped trade routes, mineral deposits, and strategic value that the Confederation has ignored due to its remoteness from central systems." The projection shifted, highlighting several asteroid fields and planetary bodies. "My employers propose establishing Tartarus as an independent trading hub. With its existing infrastructure and workforce, this facility could become a valuable waypoint for merchants seeking to avoid Confederation tariffs, bureaucratic oversight." "Smugglers, you mean?" interjected Chief Vex. Voss shrugged elegantly. "Independent traders operating outside traditional constraints. The terminology is irrelevant. What matters is the opportunity." I folded my arms. "And what would these employers of yours expect in return?" "A percentage of all transactions, exclusive docking rights, and certain guarantees of discretion." Her gaze shifted to Miranda again. "We believe Ms. Lawson has already demonstrated the organizational capabilities necessary to make such an arrangement work." And there it was, confirmation that Miranda's presence on Tartarus was no accident, that someone had been watching her activities with great interest. "This is absurd," I scoffed. "Tartarus is a Confederation facility. We cannot simply declare independence and become a trading post for criminals." "Can't you?" Once raised an eyebrow. "When was the last time a Confederation inspector physically visited Tartarus? When was the last time anyone verified the accuracy of your reports beyond the automated data transmissions?" The uncomfortable truth was that the Confederation's physical presence had been absent for years. Even before the Kral conflict, Tartarus had been low on the priority list for in-person inspections. The Confederation would send a military response the moment we stopped transmitting expected data, I argued. "Perhaps," conceded Voss, "if they noticed, if they weren't occupied with a costly war, if they had resources to spare for a distant penal colony housing criminals they have already written off." She smiled thinly. "Many ifs, Ward." I turned to Miranda, who had been watching this exchange with quiet attention. "You knew about this. This was your plan all along." She met my gaze steadily. "Not precisely. As I said, I had contingency plans in place before my arrival. Certain signals that would be triggered if I managed to establish a position of influence here, but the specifics of Captain Voss's proposal are new to me." I wasn't sure I believed her. But before I could press further, the facility's alarm system blared to life. "Proximity alert," called one of the security officers. "Confederation vessels entering the system." Voss's expression darkened. "It seems our meeting has drawn attention." The security officer's voice came again, tension evident. "3 Confederation cruisers on approach. They are hailing us." I turned to Voss. "You led them here." She shook her head. "Impossible. We took extensive precautions to ensure our approach wasn't detected." "Unless they were following you already," suggested Miranda, "looking for exactly this kind of contact." Voss's eyes widened fractionally, the first sign of genuine surprise I'd seen from her. "A trap? Using us to identify potential collaborators? We need to respond to that hail," I said urgently, "before they consider our silence hostile." "And say what, exactly?" Miranda asked, pointedly. "That we were just having a friendly chat with an unregistered vessel about turning Tartarus into a smuggler's paradise." She had a point. There was no explanation for this meeting that wouldn't raise serious questions from Confederation authorities. "Return to your ship," I told Voss. "Leave immediately. We will claim we were warning you away from restricted space." "They will have already scanned the landing bay," Voss countered. "They know we are docked. Then we claim you forced your way in. Attempted to break out prisoners. We were negotiating for time." Voss's expression was skeptical. "And when they demand details, review security footage." "Footage can be altered," Miranda interjected calmly. "Records can be adjusted." "Right, Warden?" I stared at her. What she was suggesting was far beyond bending regulations. This was outright conspiracy against the Confederation. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they are in range for detailed scans," warned the security officer. "I need a decision, Warden," Miranda pressed. "Are we covering this up, or are you turning yourself, me, and everyone in this room over to Confederation authorities for questioning?" The weight of the moment pressed down on me like a physical force. 20 years of service, of following regulations, of maintaining order on this forsaken rock. 20 years of watching the Confederation's gradual abandonment of Tartarus and its population, both inmates and staff. 20 years of making do with less, while being expected to produce more. Perhaps Miranda saw my internal struggle, because her voice softened slightly. "The Confederation sent me here to die, Warden. They will do the same to you if it serves their purposes." "Return to your vessel, Captain Voss," I said finally. "Depart immediately, but remain in the system, out of scanner range. We will contact you once we have dealt with the Confederation ships." Voss nodded sharply, already backing toward her ship. "A wise precaution. We will await your signal." She paused at the airlock. "Consider carefully, Warden. Opportunities like this don't come twice." As the Horizon's engines powered up, I turned to Miranda. "I need you to understand something. I haven't agreed to this insane proposal. I'm merely buying us time to consider all options." Her smile was knowing. "Of course, Warden, time is all we need." The next few hours were a masterclass in coordinated deception. While the Horizon retreated to the shadow of Tartarus's larger moon, we prepared to receive the Confederation cruisers. Miranda worked with the technical staff to alter security logs and camera footage, creating a narrative of a failed infiltration attempt. I briefed the senior guards on our cover story, emphasizing that any deviation could result in severe consequences for everyone on Tartarus. When Commander Rezik of the Confederation Security Force stepped off his shuttle into Landing Bay 1, we were ready for him. A tall, severe Viralian with the characteristic ridge plates of his species and a perpetual expression of suspicion, Rezik had a reputation for thoroughness. "Warden Krasnol," he greeted me coldly. "Explain why an unregistered vessel was permitted to dock at this facility." "Hardly permitted, Commander," I replied. "They attempted to force access, claiming mechanical failure. We contained them in Landing Bay 3 while assessing the threat. They departed when we arrived. Convenient." I kept my expression neutral. "They fled when our sensors detected your approach. We were preparing to deploy defensive measures, but their technology appeared superior to our outdated systems." Rezek's eyes narrowed. "I will need to see all security footage, speak with all personnel involved, and conduct a full inspection of the facility." "Of course, Commander. We have nothing to hide." The lie felt strange on my tongue after decades of honest service. "Though I should warn you, some of our systems have been experiencing glitches since the last ion storm. The footage may have gaps." What followed was the most intense inspection Tartarus had received in years. Rezik and his team went through everything: security logs, communication records, staff testimonies. They interviewed guards, examined the landing bay where the Horizon had docked, and deployed their own scanning equipment to search for traces of the mysterious vessel. Throughout it all, Miranda Lawson remained surprisingly inconspicuous. Though she was questioned as the head of the medical facility, she presented herself as a model inmate with limited knowledge of security matters. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she was anything more than what her current role implied. The inspection lasted 3 days. 3 days of holding my breath, of wondering if each new question would be the one to unravel our hastily constructed fiction. 3 days of watching Miranda operate with perfect composure, as if lying to Confederation authorities was simply another day's work. On the 4th morning, Commander Rezik summoned me to his temporary office in the administrative section. "Your facility has serious security vulnerabilities, Warden," he began without preamble. "Outdated systems, inadequate protocols, insufficient training for personnel." I nodded, accepting the criticism. "Resources have been limited, Commander. The Kral conflict has affected supply chains." He waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm submitting a full report to Central Command recommending immediate upgrades to your defensive capabilities and security procedures." This was unexpected. Not an accusation of conspiracy or deception, but routine administrative recommendations. "You have found our response to the unregistered vessel inadequate," I acknowledged. "I have found your entire operation inadequate," he corrected sharply, "but not deliberately so. Neglect rather than malice." He tapped a datapad on the desk. "You will receive a detailed list of required changes. Implementation will be expected within 60 days. War or no war." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by concern. If the Confederation was planning to increase their oversight of Tartarus, any arrangement with Vors and her employers would become impossible. "We will implement all recommendations promptly," I assured him. Rezik stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "See that you do. The inspection team departs in 3 hours. I expect your full cooperation in the meantime." As he left, I sat heavily in my chair, unsure whether to feel relieved or more concerned than before. "They suspect nothing," Miranda said confidently when we met in my office after the Confederation ships departed. "Rezik's recommendations are standard procedure following a security incident. Nothing more. Or they are watching to see what we do next," I countered. "This could all be part of a larger investigation." She shook her head. "If they suspected conspiracy, they would have removed you from command immediately. No, they believe our story. The question now is what we do with the time we have bought." I studied her carefully. "You still want to pursue Voss's proposal?" "I want to consider all options," she replied, echoing my earlier words with a slight smile. "The Confederation has proven they consider Tartarus low priority. They have left us undersupplied, understaffed, and under-equipped for years. Now they demand upgrades without providing resources to implement them. So your solution is treason, turning Tartarus into a smuggler's haven. My solution is survival. and perhaps something more. She leaned forward. Think about it. Warden, what has the Confederation ever done for anyone on this planet? They dump their unwanted here and expect them to work until they die. That's the purpose of a penal colony. I reminded her, is it? Or is that just what we have been told? Her eyes were intense now. What if Tartarus could be more? Not just a place of punishment, but a place of second chances. A society built on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. It was a seductive vision. I had to admit, the improvements Miranda had already implemented had shown the potential of a different approach. And you would lead this new society, I suppose, I said dryly. She smiled. Someone has to, but I'm not suggesting a dictatorship, Warden. What I have built here is a collaborative system where everyone has a voice and a stake in our success. A collaborative system with you at its center. Yes, she admitted without shame. Because I have the skills and vision to make it work, but I need partners, not subjects. Starting with you. I blinked in surprise. Me? You know the systems, the personnel, the Confederation protocols. You have experience I lack. Together we could transform Tartarus into something unprecedented. The proposal should have been laughable. Absurd. A transparent attempt to manipulate me into betraying everything I'd stood for. And yet I found myself considering it. Because deep down I knew she was right about the Confederation's abandonment of Tartarus. About the potential for something better than what we had. Even if I were to consider this madness, I said carefully, there are practical obstacles. Tartarus is required to transmit regular data to Central Command, production quotas, security reports. The moment those change significantly or stop altogether, they will send another inspection team, one less easily deceived. So we maintain the facade, Miranda replied simply. We continue to mine the required resources to transmit the expected data. On paper, Tartarus remains a model Confederation facility. In reality, she spread her hands, we build something new, a double life. Precisely. Nothing changes from the Confederation's perspective, but for everyone on Tartarus, everything changes. I stood and paced the length of my office, my mind racing with possibilities and dangers. And Captain Voss, her employers, what exactly do they want from this arrangement? A foothold in this sector, a base of operations away from Confederation oversight, access to resources and labor, in exchange for technology, protection, connections to markets beyond the Confederation, the means to truly make Tartarus independent. Should we ever need to drop the pretense entirely? It was treasonous. It was dangerous. It was possibly the most reckless thing I'd ever contemplated in a long life of careful service. It was also, potentially, the most meaningful. I need to think, I said finally, and I need to speak with Voss directly. Understand exactly what her employers are offering and what they expect in return. Miranda nodded, not pushing further. She knew when to retreat and let an idea take root on its own. Of course. Shall I arrange a secure communication? I nodded slowly. Do it. But understand this isn't a yes. It's merely a continuation of the conversation. Her smile suggested she considered it much more than that. And perhaps she was right. The transformation of Tartarus didn't happen overnight. It began as small changes, barely noticeable to anyone not looking closely. A new landing bay constructed under the guise of security upgrades recommended by Commander Rezik, adjustments to the mining operations that officially improved efficiency, but also diverted a percentage of resources to unofficial channels. Training programs that gradually shifted talented inmates from basic labor to more specialized roles. Throughout it all, we maintained the fiction for the Confederation, regular data transmissions, production quotas met or exceeded, security reports that showed a stable, orderly facility. When rare communications came from Central Command, we responded promptly and professionally. Meanwhile, the first independent traders began to arrive, carefully scheduled to avoid Confederation patrols. Small vessels at first, cautious captains looking for alternative routes, and willing to pay premium prices for discretion. Captain Voss returned as promised, this time with representatives from her employers, a coalition of independent worlds and trading companies operating in the shadows of the Confederation's economy. They brought technology, information and connections that slowly transformed Tartarus from a prison to a functioning society. Miranda oversaw it all with remarkable skill. The committee system she had established evolved into something resembling a governing council, with representatives from both the former inmate population and the security staff. I retained my position as warden, but the nature of the role changed, less a prison administrator and more a diplomatic liaison between Tartarus and its various partners. As the cycles passed, the charade became increasingly elaborate. When Confederation supply ships arrived, certain areas of the facility were temporarily restored to their original prison appearance. When occasional remote inspections were conducted, carefully crafted footage and data were provided. The real Tartarus, what the inhabitants had begun calling New Tartarus, or sometimes simply Lawson's, remained hidden from official view. The most remarkable change was in the population itself. As word spread through shadowy channels that Tartarus offered opportunities unavailable elsewhere, people began to arrive voluntarily. Engineers seeking freedom from Confederation restrictions, scientists whose research had been deemed too controversial, merchants looking for new markets. They came in small numbers at first, then in greater waves as our reputation grew. Within 2 years, the original prison population had become just one segment of a diverse society. Former guards worked alongside former inmates. New arrivals contributed skills and knowledge that expanded our capabilities. What had been bare survival became prosperity. And at the center of it all was Miranda Lawson. Not through force or fear, but through sheer competence and vision. She had created something unprecedented, a functioning society built from the dregs of the galaxy, operating in plain sight yet hidden from the powers that had abandoned it. The Confederation has announced a formal end to the Kral conflict. I informed Miranda during one of our regular council sessions, 5 years after the fateful arrival of the Horizon. They are reallocating resources to strengthen oversight of peripheral territories. We were meeting in what had once been the administrative center of the prison and was now the governing hub of our small but thriving independent state. The room no longer resembled the austere space it had once been. The walls were adorned with tapestries from a dozen worlds, the furniture was comfortable rather than utilitarian, and large windows offered a view of what was now a bustling settlement extending beyond the original facility. Miranda nodded thoughtfully. We anticipated this. The question is whether Tartarus is still considered valuable enough to warrant increased attention. Vitek, the Trillion, who had once represented the mining sector on the Resource Management Committee and now served as our trade minister, rumbled his concern. The minerals we have been sending have decreased in quality over the past year, as agreed. We have made ourselves appear less productive. But not so much that it would trigger immediate investigation, added Nala, our technology minister. Just enough to make us seem like a declining asset. This had been part of our strategy, gradually reducing the apparent value of Tartarus to the Confederation while building our true economy through independent channels. The official mines produced just enough to meet minimum quotas, while our real operations had expanded to previously untapped areas of the planet. There's more, I continued. Command has announced a rotation of administrative personnel for all penal colonies, including Tartarus. A tense silence fell over the room. This was something we hadn't anticipated, a complete replacement of the official staff, including myself. When? Miranda asked, her voice steady despite the potential crisis. 6 months. They are sending a new warden and senior security team to revitalize operations. Vex, who had surprised everyone by embracing the changes on Tartarus, and now served as our security director, clicked his mandibles in agitation. We cannot maintain the illusion with an entirely new administration. They would discover the truth within days. He was right. Our careful deception had worked because it had evolved gradually, with the same personnel adapting over time. New officials with fresh eyes and direct Confederation oversight would see through our facade immediately. Then perhaps it's time to stop pretending, Miranda suggested calmly. All eyes turned to her. Explain, I prompted. For 5 years we have lived a double life. We have built something remarkable here, while maintaining the fiction that Tartarus remains a simple penal colony. She spread her hands in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. What if we stop? What if instead of trying to deceive the new administration, we simply declined their appointment? You mean declare independence officially? I clarified. Make public what we have been doing in secret. Yes. Her gaze swept the room. We have defenses now, allies, resources. The Tartarus of today could withstand a Confederation response, especially with the right preparation. It was true. What had begun as a desperate gamble had grown into something substantial. The defense systems provided by Voss's employers, the network of independent traders who relied on our position, the technology and infrastructure we built while maintaining the illusion of a primitive prison facility. The Confederation would not simply accept our declaration, warned Nala. They might send a military response. They might, agreed Miranda, if they deemed us worth the resources. But consider their position. They have just ended a costly war. Their public is tired of conflict. Would they really commit to another campaign over a remote prison planet they have neglected for years? And if they did, pressed Vex. Miranda's smile was confident. Then we negotiate from a position of strength rather than secrecy. Offer trade agreements, strategic partnerships, whatever serves their interests, without surrendering our independence. The debate continued for hours, with arguments for caution and for boldness, for continued deception and for open defiance. Through it all, Miranda listened, responded, and gradually built consensus, not by force but by addressing concerns, offering solutions, demonstrating once again the leadership that had transformed Tartarus. In the end, the decision was made. Not by Miranda alone, not by me, but by the Council as a whole. In 6 months' time, when the Confederation sent their new administration, Tartarus would greet them not as a penal colony, but as an independent entity ready to establish formal relations. As the meeting adjourned and the council members departed to begin preparations, I found myself alone with Miranda in the chamber. "Did you plan for this?" I asked her. "From the beginning, was this your goal?" She considered the question, her gaze drifting to the window where the lights of the settlement twinkled in the gathering dusk. "Not exactly this," she admitted. "When I was sentenced to Tartarus, my goal was simply to survive, to make the best of a situation designed to break me." Her expression softened. "But as I came to know this place, these people, I began to see possibilities." "You manipulated us all," I observed, though without rancor. After 5 years I had come to terms with Miranda's methods, recognizing that her manipulations had usually benefited everyone involved. "I created opportunities," she corrected gently. "Opened doors. But what we built here, Krasinu, that was a collective achievement. Your experience, Vix's security protocols, Nala's technical genius, Vix's organizational skills. I couldn't have done this alone." It was true, in its way. Miranda had been the catalyst, the visionary, but the transformation of Tartarus had required all of us. "And now," I asked, "what happens after independence? What's your vision for the next 5 years? Her smile widened. "That's the beauty of it. It's not just my vision anymore, it's ours, all of ours." She gestured toward the settlement. "Ask anyone out there what they want Tartarus to become, and they will give you an answer. That's what we have really built here, not just an independent state, but a community where everyone has a stake in the future." I nodded, understanding now what had made Miranda's leadership so effective. She hadn't simply imposed her will. She had created a system where everyone's contributions were valued, where mutual benefit replaced exploitation, where even a former Confederation warden like myself could find purpose beyond rigid protocols. "The Lawson Empire," I mused, using the term that had become common among the inhabitants, though it's hardly an empire in the traditional sense. "Names have power," she replied with a shrug. "If calling it an empire makes people feel part of something grand and meaningful, I won't object. But between us," her expression grew serious, "what we have built is something rarer and more valuable than any empire. A place where second chances are real, where past mistakes don't define the future." As I looked out at the settlement that had grown from the barren prison yard, the bustling markets, the research facilities, the residential areas where former enemies now lived as neighbors, I couldn't help but agree. They had sent Miranda Lawson to Tartarus to remove her from society, to punish her for defying authority, to ensure her brilliant mind would waste away on a forgotten rock at the edge of civilized space. Instead, she had created a new society from the ground up, had transformed punishment into opportunity, confinement into freedom, a prison into a home. The Confederation had intended Tartarus to be her end. Instead, it had become her beginning and ours. 6 months later, when the Confederation ships arrived with their new administration, they were greeted not by a prison warden, but by President Miranda Lawson and the full governing council of the independent state of Tartarus. The negotiations that followed were tense but ultimately productive, the Confederation, recognizing the reality of what Tartarus had become and facing the prospect of another costly conflict, accepted our independence in exchange for trade agreements and strategic considerations. As for me, I chose to remain on Tartarus, serving first as foreign minister and later as Miranda's chief advisor. The prison that had been my assignment became my home, the prisoners my fellow citizens, the deception my proudest achievement. And sometimes, when new visitors arrive at our thriving port, I take pleasure in telling them the story of how it all began with one human woman who smiled when she should have cowered, who saw opportunity where others saw only punishment, who built an empire from the ashes of exile. They sent her to a prison planet, she made it her empire. And none of us would have it any other way.